Our scripture today is 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And we're looking at the theme, what about my rights? We live in an era of demand for rights. And such a demand can be right, or it can be a very negative aspect. Demand for rights can be positive if they address injustice. I don't think any of us want to go back to the time in America where Negroes were forced to sit in the back of a bus. I don't want to go back to the time when, in my wife's little hometown of Greenville, Alabama, in the laundromat across from the Greyhound bus station, the all-white laundromat, one evening while Jules' dad was in the laundromat, rainy, cold, stormy night, a black man and his boy came in out of the cold while waiting for a bus to take a seat in the laundromat and were evicted because they were black. There's been a positive dimension to the civil rights movement in this country. None of us want to go back to the days before there were civil rights. But there are negative dimensions as well to a demand for rights. A demand for rights, if such a right would negate the moral law of God, is not a good thing at all. The abortion rights movement, the homosexual rights movement, because they negate the moral law of God, are bad demands for rights. And a demand for rights, if the acquisition of those rights ends up destroying the society, also is bad, even if the rights by themselves may be good. Solzhenitsyn, for example, the Russian exile now in America, warns about the quest in America for legal rights, which are divorced from a concern for the true spirit of justice. When everyone becomes lawsuit happy and loses the spirit of justice in a country, the country collapses, and that has been a prophetic warning that Solzhenitsyn has given America, that in the quest for the letter of the law, we may have missed the spirit of the law. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 is dealing with the theme of Christian rights. He has begun to deal with that in 1 Corinthians 8. We looked at it last week under the title of social drinking, dancing, movies, and other sins. For Paul, the issue was whether or not to eat meat offered to idols. Paul, in that chapter, 1 Corinthians 8, moves beyond the Jerusalem Council decision of Acts chapter 15, which had given the specific directive that Christians shouldn't eat meat offered to idols. That decision was evidently temporary in nature, and it was meant to, at the time it was given, foster table fellowship between Jewish and Gentile Christians. But now Paul's moving beyond that council decision, saying it only had a temporary impact. In true reality, there's nothing wrong with eating meat offered to idols unless it wounds or grieves a brother, or unless it violates your conscience. He limits, though, the right to eat meat offered to idols by whether or not the exercise of that right will lead to another person's ruin or destruction. Some at Corinth, though, were still going to be objecting to Paul's line of reasoning in 1 Corinthians 8 and are going to say, I'm not going to give up my rights. The weaker brother needs to grow up. He has to learn to accept responsibility for himself, and he'll never learn if I keep yielding to him or her. And there's a certain amount of truth in that. Sometimes a correct course of action is to try to help a believer mature in an area where they are immature. But truth without love always becomes a very, very cold thing. If God had wanted us just to have truth, He could have dropped a book down from heaven on us. But the fact that He wanted us to know truth with love is evidenced by the fact that He gave Jesus to us, who gave up a lot of rights as the eternal Son of God to come and live among us as a poor person. Jesus won us not so much with truth, but He won us with love, a love which was undergirded by truth. So Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, even though he's talking about paying the preacher, is actually dealing with the question of eating meat offered to idols. He's going to demonstrate out of his own personal life the example of I have a right to give up my rights. He will use another example in 1 Corinthians 10 that we'll look at later, a negative example of Israel, which tries to assume rights and winds up in a lot of trouble for it. The first thing he does in verses 1 and 2 is assert his freedom and his apostleship. Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have not I seen Jesus our Lord? Are you not the result of my work in the Lord? Even though I may not be an apostle to others, surely I am to you, for you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. Assertion is a big word today. There are a lot of books about asserting yourself, and there is a legitimate way in which from time to time we need to stand up for ourselves. Paul is doing that here. He is being pushed around a great deal by the Corinthian congregation, and that is not a good thing because they are spurning his authority by demeaning his position. There are some people evidently at Corinth who are saying, well, Paul, really isn't an apostle after all because all the other apostles accept payment for their ministry. But remember, when Paul was here, he didn't accept payment at all. Therefore, he must not really be an apostle. And Paul is countering that by asserting, indeed, he is an apostle, and he is a free person. Am I not free? Can I not eat meat offered to idols? Can I not do as I will as an apostle of Jesus Christ? Yes. Am I not an apostle by the Lord? Do I witness him? Paul saw him on the road to Damascus. And Paul says, if you doubt all these things, don't you recognize that the mark of the authenticity of my apostleship is you? You are my seal. Now, the word seal in biblical days had a lot more importance than it does today. If you had a shipment, for example, of figs or dates or any other kind of commodity, it would be put in cases or bags, and that case or bag would be, a seal would be affixed to it, which if in transit the seal would be broken, then the recipient of the product could refuse it because its contents had been tampered with. When you wrote a will in those times of the first century, a will in Greek life was sealed with 7 seals. And as an heir, if you presented that will and any one of the seals were broken, the seal was invalid, or the will was invalid, because the seal was the mark of authenticity. It was the mark of ownership. And Paul said, well, if in other places they doubt my apostleship, surely not here, because your lies, the fact that you have turned to God from idols to serve the true and living God and wait for Jesus Christ from heaven, the fact that you have done this is an attestation to my authority as an apostle of Jesus Christ, one who plants the church of the living God. The lesson, I think, between the lines here is to read maybe the disappointment in Paul's heart. Here are people for whom he had really loved and labored who are ungrateful toward what he has done. And I think one of the lessons that we must always learn in the body of Christ, whether we are paid for the ministry or whether we volunteer the ministry in the body of Christ, is that there are occasions when there may be ingratitude towards someone or some group of persons whom we have really loved and labored for. The non-Christian reaction would be when there is ungratitude to, write those people off. That's how they treat me. After all of what I've done for them, then just forget it. But love never lets anyone go. Love never writes people off. And even though Paul has been challenged, and they are the seal of his apostleship, he's not going to take an attitude toward them which says, phooey with you. In the body of Christ, we never can ever afford to say that to another believer. Phooey with you. Love doesn't let go. So Paul starts out by asserting his freedom as apostleship. Then he goes on to assert the rights that he possessed as an apostle. This is my defense to those who sit in judgment on me. Don't we have the right to food and drink? Don't we have the right to take a believing wife along with us, as do the other apostles and the Lord's brothers and Cephas? Or is it only I and Barnabas who must work for a living? He says that basically he has 3 rights as an apostle. One is the right to food and drink, which I would understand to be the right to be entertained or to have hospitality given to him as an apostle of the Lord. He also indicates he has a right to travel with a believing wife at church expense, as was the habit of the other apostles, including Peter and including the Lord's brothers. And there are some, interestingly enough, who hold the view that the early apostles, the majority of them, didn't marry. But Paul here is saying that's not the case at all. The single life was the exception to the rule among the apostles rather than the rule. And even Peter was married. Peter did have a wife. He was not a single person, and his believing wife traveled with him. So did the Lord's brothers, James and Jude and the others. And Paul says, do I not have a right to this, to have my wife travel with me at church expense? Of course, we know Paul was single. And then he says in verse 6, do not I have a right not to work? Now, by this right not to work, he means a right not to engage in physical labor. We know that Paul was a tent maker, for example. Don't I have a right to be supported by you rather than, quote, working for a living? You notice I've got work in parentheses because of the common fallacy that those who are engaged in a ministry of the gospel in the body that is a paid position, those persons don't work. They kind of show up on Sunday mornings, and what do they do the rest of the week? I once asked C.M. Ward, who was Speaker of Revival Time and travels the nation widely, probably is in more churches there, on any given year than most other ministers. I said, if you were to identify the chief problem that exists in the churches that you have ministered in, what would you say it would be? And he responded to me in his typical C.M. Ward style, with somewhat humor and his deep baritone voice. He said, the trouble is with our preachers. He said, many of them are playboys. They want to play golf all week and get up and be master of ceremonies on Sunday, and it just won't work. Well, unfortunately, there are some who do that. I don't believe that's the case for the majority. But Paul is not saying here that the, quote, minister, end quote, is entitled not to work at all, just to show up and put in an appearance, but he means secular employment. Well, what are the basis for that right? Verses 7 through 14 talk about the basis for the right. Who serves as a soldier at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat of its grapes? Who tends a flock and does not drink of the milk? He uses, first of all, examples from human nature and saying it's the case with any profession that a person is paid off the benefit that is gained in that profession. A soldier doesn't support himself. We're having enough problem registering for the draft in this country without telling the people that actually would get drafted or would enlist. Now, you're responsible for your own pay while you're in the military. Have your parents send your food to you. We'd have a few problems probably with that. He's saying the vineyard owner or laborer is entitled to eat from the vineyard. The goat shepherd is entitled to eat the milk from the goat herd. That just common sense tells us that what a person works by, he ought to be benefited by. But he says, I don't want to simply speak from a human point of view. That is, I just don't want to give human analogy. And he refers to the law of God as supporting this fact. Doesn't the law say the same thing? For it is written in the law of Moses, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain. Is it about oxen that God is concerned? Surely he says this for us, doesn't he? Yes, this was written for us, because when the plowman plows and the thresher threshes, they ought to do so in the hope of sharing in the harvest. If we have sown spiritual seed among you, is it too much if we reap a material harvest from you? If others have this right of support from you, why shouldn't we have all the more? But we did not use this right. On the contrary, we put up with anything rather than hinder the gospel of Christ. Paul says another reason why he should have been supported as an apostle, and there are, by the way, people today who say that there should never be any paid position in the church, and of course Paul's laying that viewpoint to rest here. But he is essentially saying, look, in the Old Testament you will find Deuteronomy 25:4 talks about not muzzling the ox that treads out the grain. This, you might say, what in the world does this have to do with the payment of persons in the ministry? Are you comparing ministers to an ox? And yes, Paul's comparing preachers to oxes. He's saying, the Old Testament, there was a kind of animal protection society code that said that when you strap up an ox to a wheel kind of a device and it walks around and it treads out the grain, it's separating the chaff from the grain, it has a right to be unmuzzled, to lap up that grain that is there. It shouldn't be tantalized by trotting out grain and not having the chance to take some of itself. So he's saying that wasn't just written for oxes, that was written for the ministry as well. This should not be taken as an excuse for extravagant salaries. The ox doesn't eat up all the grain that he trods out, and there are some pretenders in the ministry who attempt to lap up all the grain, and should be so noted. Paul gives a third reason for why he possesses the right. Verse 13, don't you know that those who work in the temple get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share what is offered in the altar? He's saying the Old Testament practice of the Levites, the priests, was that they gained their support from the offerings of the people. And finally he says, if anyone doubts that this is a right, then let them look at the Lord himself. Verse 14, in the same way, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. Here Paul is referring back to Luke chapter 10, verse 7, where Jesus sends out the 70 and says that the laborer is worthy of his wages. Now I would give just a warning here, by the way, to younger persons here who are preparing for professions in the ministry, such as missionary service, pastoring, or staff, or the like. And it would be this. The scriptural emphasis is upon the fact that you minister and then you are paid. It is not upon the idea that you are paid and then you minister. Subtle difference between the two. But I found some false ideas that, well, ministry starts when you get hired somewhere, and then when you're hired, you start working. Nothing could be further from the case in the New Testament. You work and then you are paid. I think, for example, of the new youth minister which we have coming, Jerry Turnus. Jerry, when he began attending the church 5 years ago, began ministering right away on a volunteer basis in the church. When we had something for Jerry and for Linda to do, they filled in, stepped in, did it gladly, and ministered very faithfully. Several years ago, when we had a lag in the janitorial services of the church, immediately Jerry and Linda stepped in and filled that role beautifully. In fact, if I had a requirement in a seminary or a Bible college curriculum for every person going into missionary service or Christian education or pastoral work or the like, it would be this requirement, that every such person has to spend 1 year as a church custodian. It is the most effective training anyone can have for the ministry. I recommend it to the highest degree. I have had it myself. It will teach you the underside of the church. It will talk to you about responsibility. You will learn how to deal with ingratitude. You will learn how to pick up after people. It is just a marvelous kind of disciplinary experience. We've watched Jerry and Linda over the years. They have acquitted themselves well. They have ministered first, and now we set them aside for a position. This ought to be the way in which ministry transpires. Paul asserts the right. Then he turns right around in verses 15 through 18 and says, I have a right to give up the right. Isn't that great in an era in which there is so much demand for rights? Isn't that the counterbalance? I have the right, granted, but I have the right to give up the right. Verses 15 through 18, Paul speaks of this. But I have not used any of these rights. Am I not writing this in the hope that you will do such things for me? I would rather die than have anyone deprive me of this boast. Yet when I preach the gospel, I cannot boast, for I am compelled to preach. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. If I preach voluntarily, I have a reward. If not voluntarily, I am simply discharging the trust committed to me. What then is my reward? Just this, that in preaching the gospel I may offer it free of charge, and so not make use of my rights in preaching it. After Paul had asserted his rights to be paid as an apostle, maybe some of the Corinthians were worrying that they were going to get a past due bill for 2.5 years of ministry among them. So Paul lays that to rest right away. I'm not worried. He said, I'm not laying down these rights in order to get paid, and I wouldn't accept payment from you anyway, because that would deprive me of being able to boast all over the world that I didn't take pay at Corinth. It's a sort of a gentle irony that Paul uses on these very proud and vain Corinthian church to remind them in the midst of all their pride and self-sufficiency that he has a point of pride too, that this great church was established as a free gift of an apostle. I don't think that there is a true minister of the Lord anywhere who wishes that he were not in the same position as Paul, to be able to say with Paul, I was able to give my services free. I realize always, as a person who does receive the benefit of the right that Paul indicates here, that there may always be among some the subtle feeling that you're doing what you're doing because you're paid to do it. Nothing in my own heart could be further from that could be the furthest thing possible from the truth. And it may be that some, especially in the world, may think this on occasion. My favorite example, and I've shared this before, is the example of W.A. Criswell, pastor of First Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas, who several years ago, after I think about 35 years of ministry as pastor of First Baptist Church, returned in one check his entire salary for all the years to the church. The Lord had helped him be prudent in investments, and he was able to turn all of his salary back to them at the end of 35 years. That's what I would like to do at the end of 35 years here. But I'm not making very good progress on that. My wife always has these great ideas for investment, and if I really turned her loose, probably we would be able to develop something, but I'm just such a chicken. When it comes to investment, I'm the guy with one talent in that respect. Goes and hides it rather than invests it. Paul is concerned here about not about the issue of preaching versus not preaching. He says that's not the issue. You know, compulsion is laid upon me to preach. I have no choice in the matter. If I preach or if I don't preach, there's no choice. That's my responsibility. But he says I do have a choice between preaching with pay or preaching without pay. And while it's my right to be paid, it's my right to preach without pay. Then he, in verses 19 through 23, gives an affirmation of how consistently he has used the example of giving up his rights. Now, he's encouraging the Corinthians. Remember, all this is the context of meat offered to idols. And he's saying, look, you Corinthians need to give up your rights. And he's saying, in light of this context, I present to you this positive, consistent example. Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone, to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law I became like one not having the law, although I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak, to win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. Basically, Paul is saying here his consistent pattern in life had been to yield his rights. He had a predictable, Christ-like behavior that he knew what his goal was. It was to win other men and women, boys and girls, to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. Self was not on the throne of his life. Jesus is on the throne of his life, and he can respond accordingly. He is free enough to be a Lord of all, but he is slave enough to be subject to all. Martin Luther said beautifully of 1 Corinthians 9:19 on his little book on Christian liberty, a Christian person is the most free, Lord of all, and subject to none. A Christian person is the most dutiful servant of all, and subject to everyone. Lord of all, servant of all. Paul, in this passage, avoids the pitfalls of dogmatism and compromise. He says, there are times when you adapt your strategy in order to win a person to the Lord Jesus. It's not being consistent, but it's taking account of another person's needs. Let me just give a living illustration of this. For example, in respect to reaching young people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. There are some persons that falsely believe the only kind of music that a person should listen to or something from the past, the gospel hymns of the past or the great songs of the past or the like. And yet there have been others who have said, look, let's tune in to the cultural wave that the kids are on, not compromising the gospel, but in a sense learning to appeal to them in the music language through which the gospel can be communicated. That's the kind of principle that Paul's talking here. To the weak I became weak, to the strong I became strong. To those under the law I became as one under the law, to those without the law I became as one without the law, that I might win some. Methods change, the gospel doesn't. Paul then gives an application of how diligently we ought to pursue this matter of giving up of ourselves for the goal that is set before us. The application which he gives is in verses 24 through 27. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like a man running aimlessly. I do not fight like a man beating the air. No, I beat my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not become disqualified for the prize. Every 3 years at Corinth, the Isthmian Games were held. These in first century world were second only to the Olympic Games. The Olympic Games were the greatest, the most largely attended. Then secondly, at Corinth, the Isthmian Games. Paul is referring to these here. And he identifies in this illustration of practical life 3 things. He says he heads for a goal, he disciplines himself for the goal, and he plans to finish and gain the goal. And off of that, we then can ask of ourselves certain kinds of questions. What are we really living for? What is the finish line? Paul uses the illustration of the runner and the boxer. He says that the runner, in verse 26, I do not run like a man running aimlessly. Now you just think of that for a moment. Picture yourself at a race. Let's say it's the Olympics this last week, the speed skating race. Can you imagine Eric Heiden lining up at the starting line? The gun goes off, and he doesn't know where he's supposed to go. So he circles around a while on the ice, does figure eights, a few little pirouettes, and has a great time, thinking he's maybe doing decorative skating. What's the proper term? Rather than speed skating. No, he knows where the goal is, so he takes off. And he's got one thing on his mind, and that's to get to the goal line in world record time and beat everybody else. And Paul says, what about the boxer? The boxer doesn't just beat the air, but he hits the real opponent in the game. And so the Christian life ought to be lived with a sense of knowing the direction that we're going in. Well, we begin to get this direction, don't we, if we come to Jesus Christ. If you're here today without Jesus Christ in your life, you're basically running in circles because you have no direction and you have nothing in your life that's going to count for eternity. You are in the world without hope because you're in the world without God. And the getting of that direction is to give your life to Jesus Christ, to open up and to receive Him. Once that has been done, the next question that we ought to address ourselves in is, what is God going to be pleased in my life to do? What is going to count in my life for eternity? What are the values that are going to last beyond this life? For this life is passing away. What is really going to count into the ages? And if I know what that is, can I give myself, can I set that as a goal? That is when all is said and done, what I want to happen. Years ago, the Lord brought me to this point in reference to my own ministry here at this church. I saw a goal line. If the Lord gave me life until the year 2000, if He tarried until the year 2000, what would He be pleased to have brought into existence? I'll maybe share a little bit concerning that next Sunday. But it's a sense of having a goal line in your life, knowing what God has called you to do and pursuing it. Someone once drew a cartoon showing 2 men on Mars looking down at people on this world who were scurrying here and scurrying there and everywhere. And one of the men on Mars said to the other, "What are they doing down there?" And the other replied, "They're going." "But," said the first, "where are they going?" "Oh," said the other, "they are not going anywhere, they are just going." In contrast to that, General William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army, a great man of God who ministered to the down and out of his day, was near the end of his life invited to Buckingham Palace to meet the king. King Edward VII asked General Booth to write in his autograph album, a custom in the older days. Some of you older people here remember that this was a frequent custom in many areas of having an autograph album that people wrote in. General William Booth wrote in King Edward VII's autograph album these words: "Your Majesty, some men's ambition is art, some men's ambition is fame, some men's ambition is gold. My ambition is the souls of men." That was his bottom line. That was his goal line. He gave everything toward it. and he got it. That's basically what Paul is saying here by way of practical application. So strong is this matter of becoming all things to all men, of yielding rights where it would hurt someone, of pressing toward the goal, that becomes the supreme thing, reaching the goal, not getting stuck somewhere in between on some secondary issue. Well, what is necessary if you're going to reach a goal, if you have a goal? Well, discipline is going to be required. So Paul talks about the runner under strict training, the boxer as well under strict training, not just beating the air. There are many persons who have great athletic potential but never develop that athletic potential because there is no discipline in their life. Many great students have great potential as a student, I have found in my experience of teaching, but because of the lack of discipline do not develop the potential. I think it's one of the saddest things that a teacher faces. After Eric Heiden was winning all these medals this week in speed skating, I thought to myself, there's got to be a story behind that. He just didn't all of a sudden sail onto the ice and win 5 gold medals. It's got to be something in his background. And thought, because this is an illustration that Paul is using here, the runner, and he's a speed skater. Surely there's got to be a living illustration of what Paul's saying about strict training. I remember that Time magazine several weeks ago carried the Heidens on the cover, so I went to the library and got a back copy of Time and found this fascinating remark on the Heidens, and Eric especially. He is a straightforward young man, not given much to such mysticism about his sport because he knows perhaps better than anyone else the price that must be paid for these moments. The secret to the Heidens is simple, says team manager Bill Cushman. They have talent and they just work harder than anybody else. Notice the combination. Talent and they just work harder than anybody else. Their regime would drive a marathon runner to retirement. During the summer they work out twice daily, running up to 10 miles. Bike riding, 100 miles some days, other days just 45. Weight training. And finally, going through the exercises to strengthen specific muscles for speed skating. Several miles of duck walks with weights on their shoulders. Endless circling to strengthen the left or inside leg for turns. When fall comes to their Madison, Wisconsin home, they put on skates and start training in earnest. Notice, all that was not in earnest. At fall, they pick up their skates and start training in earnest. Eric says, sometimes I want to quit, but then I look at Beth and she keeps digging in and it inspires me and I keep going, which suggests that any rigorous training ought to be accompanied by encouragement. No half-hearted effort in a winning achievement. The strenuous self-denial of the athlete in training for his fleeting reward, the laurel wreath or the gold medal, is a rebuke to all half-hearted and flabby Christian service. The athlete denies himself many legitimate things. That's Paul's point. Denial of many legitimate things in pursuit of his goal. You say, oh, Pastor, you're right. You're plowing right down my furrow today. I have no discipline in my life as a Christian. I'm going to go out of the sermon and I'm going to get on a crash discipline course. Could I ask you not to do that? You find that a crash discipline course in Christian life works just about as poorly as a crash diet. You may take off a few pounds, but it won't last if it's crash. It's got to be a fundamental alteration of life. I don't ever recommend a person coming and saying, Pastor, I'm not praying in my life. I think God's talking to me and I better start praying an hour a day and make up for all the time I miss. I want to say that as a general principle, if you have been praying 0 hours a day or 0 minutes a day and you start praying an hour a day, you're going to be in trouble real quick because it's just simply too much discipline for you. If same way with the reading of the Scripture. If you haven't been reading any Scripture, you're going to try to read the Bible through in 6 months. I would suggest that you not tack on something that hard. I suggest you start small and build up. That you start with 5, 10, or 15 minutes and begin to work up from there to whatever level of discipline the Holy Spirit is wanting to develop in your life so you can be effective as a Christian. But the Christian life simply can't be lived without discipline. Discipline doesn't save us. It doesn't bear upon the fact that Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law and we're declared righteous because of Him. That's a free gift. But if we're going to live the Christian life effectively and serve the body of Christ, then we're going to have to go through discipline. And that's exciting. That is exciting. But there is pain to it. The last thing that Paul mentions in verse 27 is the fact that anybody that trains and has a goal wants to finish. Wasn't it sad to see not Fradiani, but Ty Babylonia and Randy Gardner have to drop out at the last moment because of a muscle pull in the leg? All those years of training and didn't finish. That just sort of leaves you with a sick feeling inside. And Paul felt that when he contemplated, after all these years of discipline, that now in the later stage of his life he might just begin living for himself and abandon the principles by which his previous years had been lived out. So he says, I don't want this to happen. I don't want to become disqualified. The word that Paul uses in the Greek is a very intriguing word, adikomos, which is used to describe something that doesn't pass a test. Best illustration I can think of it is several weeks ago I was out at Dad's home and he was getting out some of his old stuff from the past, and he pulled out some Tibetan silver dollars, big, nice silver dollars that he had gotten his days on Tibet. And we were dinging the dollars. You'd have to be older perhaps to appreciate the idea that when coins used to be worth something, you could tell by the quality of the ring. But in Tibet, their way of payment was in silver dollars, Tibetan silver dollars, much larger than American silver dollars, and I assure you much more silver in them. And they would, you may have, for example, have to pay 100 of these out for a year's lease on a property or whatever. And they would, if you had 100 of them and you were going to transfer those silver dollars to the person you're paying the lease price to, he would take each dollar and he would ding it, either with his finger or with another dollar, to see that it had the right ring. They could tell with their ear whether the ring gave the right proportion of silver in it. And there were some silver dollars that just had a thud sound to them, and those that had too much lead in them, they didn't have enough silver content, and they were rejected. They were adicomos. They didn't pass the test. We just had some fun, by the way, and this is off the point, but we tried an American dollar against a Tibetan dollar. A little bit of difference. The American dollar went thud. Paul is worried about being cast away. Not that he's worried about losing his salvation. That's not the bearing. This is a passage not dealing with salvation. It's a passage dealing with Christian service. And he's afraid that after all has come and gone, at this point in his life, he might abandon his principles and become useless from here on in his Christian life and ministry. And he doesn't want that to happen. Paul, you see, did not fear the things most of us fear. He did not seem to fear sickness or suffering. He certainly didn't fear persecution. He didn't fear death. But he did fear the possibility of failing to fulfill the task that God had given to him. That was his greatest fear. And because of that fear, and because of the love of God which constrained him, he strove to reach the goal which had been set before him. All of us do have a goal. Is there going to require, or we should have a goal if we don't. If we have a goal, it's going to require strict training to reach that goal. Southern Californians, like all Christians all over the world, are great on the start and poor on the finish. There needs to be more finishing of what we begin, and more care in prayer, lest we begin stuff that we're not called to do and then drop out. But discipline, and then arriving at the finish line. I'm going through, says the poet. I'll pay the price no matter what others do. That's the kind of commitment that Paul is speaking of to us in the Scripture today. Let's look to him in prayer. We see, Lord, in the heavens one symbol and image of the finish line. That moment when we come face to face with you and you inquire about us concerning our life. That moment when at the finish line you say to us, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little, you will now be faithful over much." Lord, if there are persons here today in this service who do not know you personally, may they in these moments open their own life to you, that the endless circling in their life may be over, and that their true and new direction might now be established in their hearts. Grant this, I pray, O Lord, that receiving you is so simple as where we are, simply inviting you into our life, and I pray that this action will take place as even we're praying now. Your Spirit is here to bear witness to Jesus. I pray too, Lord, for Christians in this body who are struggling with an area of rights. Maybe a legitimate demand for a right in a family, that we feel as a parent or as a child or as a wife or a husband that we have a certain right to something. And you're confronting us today with this message with a new idea, that we have a right to give up the right. And only your Spirit can direct us to know whether we should insist on the right or insist on the right to give up the right. Lord, grant revelation by your Spirit to see a new direction and opportunity for us as free men and women in you. Where there is even pain in your body with people relating to one another, with some not responding in a way that others would have felt comfortable or best about, that we have in you the right to be free. To always go on serving and giving and loving and believing in people, even when that is not reciprocated back to us. Grant, Lord, that we may truly grow in you, grow up in grace, realizing that the rewards of this world are like the laurel wreath that is on the Olympic winner of those times. That at the end of a race, all that the runner had worked for is simply something that perished, a little wreath on his or her head. that passed away rather quickly. All that time, all that discipline, all that energy, all those years of work for a fading crown. For a gold medal that will perish with this world. How much more then, Lord, can we take encouragement that we run in a race where the rewards have a far more important stake and are far greater in dimension. That the reward which we strive for in our Christian service is a reward that is eternal and does not pass away, that abides forever in the heavens. We thank you for the prospect that awaits for us as your people. We can therefore somehow adjust to and adapt to and respond to the great crisis of life as well as the small ones, because we know that we are hastening on to meet you. That the moment of our appearance before you and your appearance before us is always at hand. Help us to strive and to be faithful in your name. Amen.